On the 500th day of war, something for Ukrainians to celebrate. The heroic return of 5 commanders who defended the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. Once held captive by the Russians, now home. After the hugs, they stand to attention for Ukraine's other war hero.
They fought for the sake of Ukraine. They fought absolutely heroically. They went through Russian captivity. Then they were in Turkey for more than 300 days. It's time for them to be at home.
Ankara brokered the deal that saw the commanders living in Turkey. But Russia said that agreement had been violated, that the men should have remained in Turkey until the end of the war. This was a brief return back to Ukraine for Zelensky, who in recent days has been to Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Turkey, all NATO members. Today he welcomed the Polish president, required face-to-face, hug-to-hug diplomacy, as Ukraine pushes for a timetable to join NATO ahead of the alliance's summit this week. But while Poland says membership for Kyiv must be on the cards, the United States is not on the same page.
The big strategic issue is that Ukraine wants membership in NATO. Should it get membership in NATO?
I don't think it's ready for membership in NATO, but here's the deal.
President Biden said the war must end before any talk of membership. That stance doesn't wash with Ukraine, given this was what they were told 15 years ago.
My country's position is clear. NATO should welcome Georgia and Ukraine into the membership action plan. And NATO membership must remain open to all of Europe's democracies that seek it.
President Biden today headed for the UK before the NATO summit. His much criticised decision to send cluster ammunition to Ukraine perhaps shows a desire to offer them not NATO, but the so-called Israel model. The US has no formal defence alliance with the Israelis, but has provided arms and military training for decades. On the Russian side today, there were unconfirmed rumours that President Putin had dismissed Valery Gerasimov, commander of Russia's invasion force, the man Wagner mutineer Yevgeny Prigozhin so vocally criticised. A sign perhaps of Moscow in crisis or Putin in a new rage. Last night, Zelensky attended a prayer for peace in Lviv. How many hopes and wishes must be running through his mind ahead of yet another week where he might not get everything he wants?
Well, Emma Ashford is a senior fellow at the Stimson Centre, a leading foreign affairs think tank, as well as an adjunct assistant professor at Georgetown University. I spoke to her earlier and I started by asking how serious the split was amongst NATO allies over the US supply of cluster munitions to Ukraine.
You know, I don't think it's any more serious than a number of the rifts that we've seen develop in recent months. There are countries within NATO that view the war in Ukraine as an existential conflict that everything should be done to win. And then there are countries mostly further away from the conflict that see it as something that is less existential, and they worry perhaps more about escalation to the nuclear level or to a bigger conflict.
And, you know, Joe Biden's been staunch in his support for Ukraine. Do you see that continuing, or do you think both he and maybe the American public might tire of it?
I think Biden is facing very much a political dilemma here. He has been very staunch in his support for Ukraine, but the counteroffensive the Ukrainians are engaging in is not going well. The addition of the cluster munitions is apparently to counteract the fact that there isn't enough other ammunition supplies. And there is some growing opposition, particularly among the Republican grassroots, to say that the US should try and end the war. And so Biden is facing a lot of pressures on this front.
And do you think he, at any point, might get impatient with the amount of time he's spending on Europe? You know, does he see Russia as, in future, perhaps, you know, Europe's problem rather than his?
You know, I think Biden himself is very much a dedicated transatlanticist, but he's also old, for lack of a better word, and many experts even in his own administration have been arguing that the US needs to focus more on China and to, if not pull back from Europe, then at least enable Europe to do more.
And do you think, as President Obama did, he might pivot increasingly or try to pivot to the Pacific in his second term?
I think it was a priority for this administration when they first came in, and I think it is a source of frustration for many, even inside the administration, that they have got bogged down in Europe in this way. So I think a Biden second term, we might see them start to focus more on China. I think certainly if Biden were not to be re-elected.
So Biden's visiting London this week and then the NATO summit. What do you expect his stance to be towards Ukraine at that summit? Because obviously there's been these calls for Ukraine to join NATO. Do you think he'll give that quite short shrift?
Even among those in Washington who are very supportive of NATO membership for Ukraine, I think there is a general sentiment that it is not going to happen now or anytime soon. The administration has been more focused on thinking through alternative ways that they might try and provide some guarantee of future arms to Ukraine. Some people have been calling this the Israel model, like the US-Israel relationship. And I suspect if we see any announcements, it will be along those lines.
This meeting in London and then the NATO summit comes at a pretty crucial time for Joe Biden. He's started his re-election campaign. There are continued and repeated questions about his age and his faculties. Do you think that is of increasing relevance, really?
It's certainly problematic. Biden is, objectively doing very well as president. The economic situation is excellent. He's handled the war in Ukraine very well, all of these things. But his popularity ratings are not very good. And many Americans, I think, if given a choice between him and Donald Trump, who's probably the most likely Republican nominee, they would probably vote for Biden again, but it would not be a first choice. And I think if you look at the polls, many Americans say that they would like Biden to step aside in favor of somebody younger. They believe his age is a concern.
You talk about stepping aside for someone younger. I mean, there isn't really a plan B, is there, if his health deteriorates?
This has been a consistent problem in this administration. There are plenty of eager, capable young politicians, but nobody who is an obvious successor to Biden. And I think that's why the party continues to say, well, Biden is probably our best shot at retaining the White House next time around.
Emma Ashford, thanks very much.
Thank you.